is alarming if you ask me. The small habits we have. We cut down trees, we don't plant others, we don't recycle plastic. The list is endless. We are contributing to the warm climate that is there at the moment.
I need to throw away my plastic bottle efficiently. How much of that will you get from the rest of the population? That is a small margin as compared to institution taking up corporate responsibility in the fight against climate change. And therefore the narrative should shift in that we want institutional accountability.
Both situations exist. Both you as a person take responsibility for your actions in the climatic change movement, and as institutions, we hold them accountable.
That's what we need to do. We need, as Kenyans, to be taking charge of the climate change story for ourselves. And the reason why we're saying this is because we've got to be able to push solutions, right? But we've also got to be able to see who is responsible and be able to hold them to account.
The future is with you. Often people talk about, when they talk about climate change, they talk about, the children and the future generations. But the reality is there won't be future generations unless you do something.
The effects of climate change do not discriminate whether you're part of this conversation or not.
It's up to us young people to create these conversations, to make people understand the importance of dealing with climate change.
The reason we are having this forum, it is to take it away from the usual policy makers, the usual climate change activists, and bring it close because the effects of climate change do not discriminate whether you're part of this conversation or not. But to an even bigger scale is so that let it elevate the kind of conversations you can have as an individual when it comes to climate change. So let's not look at this as very simplistic, but look at yourselves as the agents that will take these conversations further from here.
I will be giving a speech on bits and bytes. That's my topic. It's basically to explain the effects of climate change with the occurrences of floods, droughts, heat waves, famines, and the rest. When I was young, I was fascinated by one device, the microwave oven. It was such a unique invention. I mean, how could a device that looks like a television, for those who can relate, be able to cook, bake, warm food? It was fascinating. I really wanted to be a scientist. I wanted to recreate that when I grew up. Ladies and gentlemen, at the moment, I am a scientist. In fact, we're all scientists. Yeah, some of you are very shocked, and allow me to explain why we're all scientists. We are single-handedly turning the earth into a microwave oven. Ladies and gentlemen, the small habits we have. We cut down trees, we don't plant others, we don't recycle plastic. The list is endless. We are contributing to the warm climate that is there at the moment. The temperatures are rising, we have hotter days and hotter nights. Evaporation levels are quite high. In fact, most countries since 2016 are experiencing more severe droughts, more than they have seen for the last 50 years. If I was to put it into perspective, the number of Kenyans that are facing severe famine at the moment and hunger due to climate change is approximately 3.5 million. That is approximately the entire population of Eritrea. This is alarming if you ask me. The higher evaporation rates are causing the air to be able to occupy a higher capacity for water. This increases the precipitation, El Ninos, floods, you name it. The list is endless. It's devastating. It's saddening. Knowledge is power. If people know the effects they are causing, it will enable us to impact more change. When I was younger, I wanted to be a scientist. I wanted to use bits and bytes to change the world. not foster habits that later bite us. You can do better. I can do better. I'm tired of creating ovens. Let's be the scientists who actually create a euphoria for the generations to come.
Now, the reason why we are bringing this motion to you today is because currently the status quo is that people are focusing more on personal responsibility, which is why I believe most of you are here. Because of that personal responsibility in terms of engaging in climate action. But it has proven that this personal responsibility is not working, or it has not had the larger change that was expected, which is why now we're bringing this motion that should abandon this narrative of personal responsibility and focus mainly on institutional accountability for a few key reasons. First, we need to talk about power. What kind of power does an individual have to cause this change or a greater change in this climate movement compared to an institution? I'll say that institutions have more power. Therefore, we believe that encouraging these narratives that are in favor of institutional accountability will bring out more change, because these institutions will therefore be motivated to engage more in actions that lead to coming up with solutions of climate change. So the point is, these institutions have power, they care about their image. The fact that they have more power in causing change compared to a single individual means that they can be able to achieve a greater change or greater effect compared to these individuals. That brings me to my next point. Separation between an individual and an institution. An individual in an organization is not there to advance their own idea. They are there to advance the ideas of an organization and the objective that this organization has. Therefore, an individual, whatever idea they may have, will not hold when it comes to such a place whereby an institution wants to come up with change. Let's say someone wants to make change out of something, and whatever change they want to make is going to affect an issue like this now, the issue of climate action. An individual wants a certain solution that might lead to maybe affecting the profits of this organization. The organization is not going to follow this person. They'll be sacked and someone better will be put in that position. So individuals should always focus on the objective of the main agenda of an organization. Also, the last thing we need to talk about is capital. Institutions have more capital that is going to be used in coming up with solutions to climate change. They have more capital to engage in research, and again, research is very important. A good point was raised earlier on about the effects of solar, saying that solar might not be a long-term solution because of how those solar panels are being produced and how maybe they last 25 years, then they are going to end up in a dump somewhere. We need institutions to come up or to sponsor a research that is going to come up with long-term solutions to things like that, to make sure that even solar panels, these solar panels can be able to last even 100 years or come up with better means to solve these issues. Therefore, institutions are better equipped to solve this issue. Since personal responsibility has failed, we therefore have no option but to go with institutions. Thank you, and I rest my case.
So panel, ladies and gentlemen, 4 key things you're going to get from my speech. First of all, I'm going to tell you how a narrative looks like. Secondly, I'm going to explain to you what a personal responsibility looks like. Thirdly, how does institutional accountability look like? And lastly, how does both look like in the world we live in today? Of course, we get all the points to talk about people, how these institutions have power, initiative, and all that. While you focus more on that, what is going to weigh more on your case is when you tell us specifically why personal responsibility cannot really attain all this that you've spoken about. You just said that personal responsibility has failed. But ladies and gentlemen, that is a lie. For very long time, institutions or even these climate change movements have been focusing more on institutions, on industries that are carbon emitters, on these institutions that contribute highly to carbon, to all these emissions. The reason why we have Paris Agreement was to focus on institutions that are globally contributing to this issue to do with climate change. Personal responsibility hasn't really been tackled much or hasn't really been given that much credibility, because we think that at a point in time where we are able to educate even those living in the grassroots level, that hasn't really been done. You only get to hear what institutions contribute to climate change, but you cannot be responsible for your own actions to climate change, which we think this is very dangerous. At a point in time where you cannot really be responsible for your own actions, you cannot recycle, you do not know anything about climate change, we think this is very detrimental. But what we propose from our side is a world where we have personal responsibility and also climate change movement focusing on institutional accountability. Before I go to rebuttals and forget my case, how does a narrative look like? We think a narrative is something that is propagated in a society and creates something like a norm and creates something like nurtures the mindsets of people. So at a point in time where you actually abandon this narrative of personal responsibility, we think that you're creating a society where people cannot really be responsible for their own actions, and this again is detrimental. What does personal responsibility look like? Personal responsibility looks like these climate change movements going to grassroots level, educating people on the dangers of climate change. So we think that personal responsibility looks like these climate change movements educating these people on ensuring that there is recycle of these reusable things, also ensuring that people do not cut trees and people do not engage in actions that contribute to climate change. What does institutional accountability look like? It looks like when we have these industries, we have a certain kind of standard where these gases are not, or emissions are not to pass this kind of level. We think institutional accountability is one which ensures those living within the environs are also protected. So how does both look like? A world which we propose. We propose for a world whereby, as we focus on institutional accountability, we also focus on the heads of these institutions. So we think that when you also propagate this narrative of personal responsibility, you're also going to ensure that these heads of institutions have the initiative to ensure that these actions are also reduced. Because you're tackling the institution itself, yes, and you're also tackling the individuals within these kind of institutions. How we think this is going to benefit, in as much as you talk of these individuals not having power, not having control, we tell you that knowledge is something that is very important. And when you create a narrative where people are able to be nurtured in their mindset, where they know the actions that lead to climate change or global warming, then they are able to be more responsible. We think the society is much better when both are able to coexist and fight climate change. Thank you.
It's important to understand that when you talk about abandon the narrative, means that it's very prevalent in the society, but it's so redundant and it's not working. That is why we're shifting the focus to a different mechanism that we feel will have much more uptake to the battle that is climate change. So therefore, why do we believe that we should abandon the narrative of personal responsibility? You've been explained to why it is important for us to shift the narrative. As you've said, it's the norm and the mindset that is in the society. Therefore, when you change how people think, because personal responsibility has been there. We have Greta Thunberg right now, we had Wangari Maathai, but how much uptake do we have of their ideology for people to take up responsibility that I need to throw away my plastic bottle efficiently, I need to stop using plastic wrappers, I need to stop. How much of that will you get from the rest of the population? That is a small margin as compared to institution taking up corporate responsibility in the fight against climate change. And therefore the narrative should shift in that we want institutional accountability. We explained to you why institutional accountability is more important. How then would they achieve this institutional accountability? We have such movements such as Client Earth going to big corporates such as Volkswagen to reduce their carbon emission. This is an uptick whereby they take the forefront to fight the climate change because they change the system of mechanism, they change the system of power through such climate movement and through such climate movement initiative. And this is not going just through to the CEO, who will now have to take personal responsibility for the type of cars they build. It's now onto corporate responsibility, how these cars are going to be used in the society, what type of cars, what type of gases, and how much they're going to give out to the society. Therefore, the narrative of personal responsibility tried to work. It did, but it has failed. So we believe we should shift the narrative to it being institutional accountability. Like I've told you, Climate Earth has worked because this is the model that is actually working. Uptake of serious institutions, therefore they have to reduce the amount of emissions they have. We're seeing so much changes, even in fuel companies such as Shell. They have to redefine the type of oil they give out. We are seeing that this narrative of institutional accountability is working as opposed to personal responsibility, and this is why we abandon. We don't refuse both exist on both sides of the world, but why should we abandon one for the other? Our side, we've showed you the power of the change exists in our side of the spectrum, because the corporate responsibility, and as you've been told, the government has a social contract to ensure that the people living in that society are well protected, they're well catered for, and therefore the environment is well catered for, because the rise in ecocide crimes is very looming, and therefore it's upon the institutions to give out mass education that personal responsibility won't attain that target on a large scale as opposed to institutional accountability. Collectivism is better than individualism. Therefore, we believe that we should abandon. It exists, we accept it exists, but we should abandon and favor one over the other. Therefore, I addressed my case by saying this House believes that the climate change movement should abandon the narrative of personal responsibility in favor of institutional accountability.
I feel that this motion has not been dealt with as appropriately as it should be dealt with. For this motion to be understood appropriately, we must understand that we are dealing with a catastrophe at a global level. We've created this situation for the past 150 years. It's not something that started 10 years ago. And us pointing fingers at Shell is not going to solve our problems right now. Us pointing our fingers at Volkswagen is not going to solve our problems right now. We are facing a catastrophe, an existential crisis that threatens to destroy all life on the planet. And pointing fingers at individual institutions will never work to solve our problem. We must understand, therefore, where the power of change exists. I think that a profound question has fallen into meme these days. Would you rather have $1 million or have 1 million friends? It's a question that you will see on TikTok, and every other person will have a variation of it in cartoon form or something like that. But would you rather have 1 million friends or $1 million or $1 million? You could have 1 million friends and ask them to give you $2 each. You have $2 million instantly. We have 8 billion people in the world today. I have good friends. Anyway, we live in a world today where we have 8 billion people. We must ask ourselves, of the maybe 100,000 corporations that exist today, and the 8 billion people who exist today, who have the capacity to make the greatest change? 8 billion people doing something small can change the situation in a much greater way than a few institutions can do. The little things add up. It's about the simple question of whether or not the little things can add up, and the personal responsibility and institutional accountability both can play a part in that. Bringing these problems to the grassroots is a major issue that the natural justice movement is trying to deal with. Bringing those issues to the grassroots, bringing those issues to individuals, that is the core of most of these movements. Whether or not you do something, you have to start at home to deal with these issues. It's not something that you can point a finger at large corporations to do. It simply isn't that way. Thank you.
Who's telling the climate change story? So I want to go back a little bit, right? And think about how we started here. Think back for yourselves. When did you start thinking about climate change? But even go back a little bit. Do you recall that there was a time we called it global warming? Yeah? In your lifetime as well, right? And we shifted from calling it global warming to calling it climate change. And there's always reasons, right? Think about what was the reason behind that naming shift, right? Then the way the stories were being told, the definition of the causes of climate change, what were the, we know it's the emissions of greenhouse gases. And we know that a lot of it, as we've said, from the north, right, the global north, the emissions, the industrial, the large-scale agriculture, the industrial emissions that happen. And then we talked about, then they'll tell us, well, because certain folks are the ones who are defining the issue, they also came up with the solutions for climate change, right? We started hearing more of this language of mitigation, right? Adaptation, resilience. And there were certain solutions that were being propagated, not just in the global north, but also to us here on our continent, and most particularly, of course, in our situation in Kenya. So think about it. It was, we know that we've got glaciers that are melting. We know there's going to be rising sea levels around the world. We read, and if you read widely on these issues, you will know about the polar bear, right? And the impact on the polar bear. You will also know about salmon migration. Do we have salmon here? We don't have salmon in our waters, but we can see a lot of studies on that, right? We will hear about, especially in the last, I think, 3 years in the US, there have been massive fires during their summer, right? Extensive fires that you'll see, wild raging fires and destruction of a lot of forests and people having to migrate. You see families are camping and moving into motels or leaving the city and the state. So these are some of the stories we're hearing about, and we know that these are caused by climate change. We also know that there's the issue of, we're told one of the fixes, a major fix, is reforestation, right? And where is that reforestation pushed? Here, right? We're not hearing about go and reforest in Toronto, in Canada, right? It's going to be in our lands. So those solutions, those are some of the solutions that are being promoted here. I'm just saying, I'm not saying these are the pros and the cons, I'm just saying let's recognize, right, what are being presented as the solutions for us, right? Clean energy is expensive, relatively speaking. So who's going to pay for it? Who's responsible, right, for this? If you ask that story now, it wouldn't be the folks who caused our underdevelopment would be told, let's move on. Colonialism ended, you've been independent for 50, 60, 70 years. Come on, stop complaining, right? And yet this was a very key question in Glasgow that Pooven was talking about, this question of who pays for it. Why, then, we ask, is it us who have to take out the loans, even more loans, as Kenyans know, right? We're suffering from the burden of loans, yet we need more loans in order to be able to pursue this path to clean energy. Whose responsibility is that? These are some of the questions that we ask. So I do encourage you to break those chains in terms of how you think and how you approach these solutions. Be radical. We need that. Be creative. And let your imagination soar, because only when we're able to tell our own stories and we're able to ask the right questions, will we be able to find the solutions that we need for our time here in Kenya and, of course, then for the rest of our continent. Thank you all. Really enjoyed being here with you. I look forward to listening.
And what I want to try and do in very few minutes is just paint a picture of where we are, because every activist, the UN General Secretary, you would have heard it from many people that we don't have much time. And when we say we don't have much time, means if you look at any of the science reports, it talks about maximum 10 years to fundamentally shift how we live on the planet. If we don't, then we face major consequences. But indigenous communities that we work with in Africa and other parts of the world, they feel like the next 4 to 5 years are going to be the most important years on the planet. Meaning, if we don't shift how we live on the planet in the next 4 to 5 years, then a lot of things can't be reversed. So the impacts of the climate and other crises at the moment. So if you take what's happening, since the year I was born, 70% of the animals have gone extinct. And that extinction rate is increasing every day. So even today, there's a large number of animals going extinct. We know that the biodiversity loss, meaning all the biodiversity we have on the planet is being decimated. So if you think, how is it being decimated? It's being decimated because we're cutting down indigenous forests. We're cutting down nature in order to do large-scale agriculture and to do other things. But once we break down that biodiversity, we are part of that biodiversity. There's millions of locusts, for example, in East Africa and other places. More and more that breakdown is going to happen. Or the fact that diseases are being passed from animals to humans, more and more, that's going to increasingly happen. So if you take, let's say, the melting glaciers in Antarctica, it was scientifically recorded that one of the largest glaciers, the Theiss Glacier, would take several decades to melt. But the latest report shows that within 5 years, that glacier will be gone. So what does that mean? It means just with the one glacier melting, sea level will rise by 0.5 meter. Now, 0.5 meter may not seem like a lot, but for most island states, for most areas on the coast, even if you take Lamu, a 0.5 meter rise means a lot, because the water would definitely start encroaching, as it already is in many places. So it's important to unpack each of those different kind of aspects. But also Sylvia talking about the microwave, the Earth being a microwave. That's how it is, and that's how it's starting to feel more and more, with the heat waves that are going on, and so on. And the last thing I want to say is it's important to bring in new ideas, because it's not just about saying fossil fuels is bad or big scale agriculture, but you have the innovative minds to bring in ideas, solutions, and to put forward, because we can't just bring things down, we have to build things as well. And part of this is about the decolonization process, because if we don't decolonize, especially in our minds, we'll continue to live in this way, thinking that this is the best way to live. But there's many other ways, and I think especially more and more indigenous knowledge is coming forward, to bring different ways of living sustainably, of respecting each other, of respecting the planet, and so on. And I think it's important that we start to open our minds to more than what we read, in our books. So I'll stop with that. So, Sante Sana.
Ladies and gentlemen,
debaters, public speakers, activists,
and people represented from all institutions,
all the 9 universities, Natural Justice, the Kenya National Debate Council, Executive Committee, and the judges.
Thank you all for joining us for this auspicious occasion
that we have really enjoyed here at the Ngong Hills Hotel.
There has been a lot of learning,
a lot of listening,
a lot of enjoying,
a lot of games,
learning on leadership,
learning on what we can do,
and of course, consciousness on climate change.
Climate change that we have been debating on. Climate change that before we may have only heard or had a vague idea, but I'm sure that now we go home
with ideas that can impact globally as well as locally.
And ideas that will translate from these rooms to conversations we have in our houses
and in our different work and school spaces.
That is very true. We hope you have enjoyed these sessions. Have you?
Yes.
I do not believe them.
Say it again. Have you enjoyed this?
Yes.
Would you be here again next time?
Yes.
Will we be here again next time?
Yes! So, we want to thank all of you who have been here, Natural Justice as well, for putting this together for all of us.
We'd like to thank the Kenya National Debate Council for making this possible and for coordinating the debaters, the schools, the institutions, and the judges.
And of course, all of you for taking your time and being present with us.